Hello and welcome to another indie game review. This week I will be taking a look at the new indie puzzle platformer called Youropa. But before I start the review of the game, I'd like to say a few words about its development. Freckle is the indie studio that brought us this game, and the interesting story is that it was actually in production for a whole decade. They had their ups and downs, of course, and the hardest part for them was getting a publisher. Because if you remember, 10 years ago it was quite hard to self-publish, considering that platforms like Steam and the App Store were not that popular back then. But after a decade and with as few as 3 or 6 programs at a time, they managed to finish the game, which should be quite motivational for any startup programmers out there. I just wanted to say a few words to just give some insight about the backstory, about how it was developed. But without further ado, let's get into the actual game review. The game is introduced in a flashy cutscene that shows us the game's setting, Paris, which should be quite obvious by the signs and Eiffel Tower being in the center of all things. And right after that, the game zooms down to the player character, a thing with a huge head that it barely is able to carry on its body, considering how it always comically sways around. Now that I think about it, the pure gravity pull of that big alien head could have been the reason why everything went wrong. Who knows? I haven't finished the game yet, but unlike more than few games I play for these reviews, I am actually going to continue playing it afterwards. And in the last sentence I said alien, but since I was never in Paris, this might just be how they all look there. I should visit it once to check it out. But beside these few things, not much is known at the start about why all of this happened or what your protagonist actually is. But in games like this, story is usually on the side of the puzzle and platforming gameplay, which is the main focus. The gameplay revolves around gravity and perspective. Many stages are broken up and twisted in ways that force the player to explore and find solutions to puzzles, which start off quite simple with easy switch pressing puzzles and gravity defying walks around a stage to find the next place to walk to without dropping down to earth because of the gravity. This is done by forcing the player to walk up ramps so the suction cups on its feet cling to the walls and ceilings, which limits the player's movement and makes some puzzles a bit harder. But they are sometimes annoying when just a small slip can make your character plummet down to earth. But of course, that isn't all that there is to the game. There are unlockable abilities, like flipping levers and the ability to carry and kick objects, which is actually quite fun in the game's physics engine. But of course, it can be quite hard to judge where an object will go after you kick it. And light objects like balls can keep bouncing off the walls for quite a while before stopping. So I sometimes had to wait at least a minute for one of them to either stop or drop off the world to start the puzzle again. But the team actually used the 10 years of production to polish the puzzles, and none of them were particularly annoying, bar few of the ones that made me wait for a burly NPC to make its way to a switch that allowed me to move on, which took a while since they are quite slow and it broke the pace of the game a bit. But while I wait for these slow dude bro NPCs to make their way to the switch, I had a lot of time to appreciate the graphics of the game. They are quite cartoony, but that gives it a nice charm and the ability to paint your character any way you want. And by that I mean any way you want with the preset toolkit, made it just feel a bit more personal. And that's not all. The damage that the character takes is shown by the paint flaking off of it. And if all the paint flakes away, game over, which is quite an original thing and I had to mention it. Besides that, another thing that they put into the game is the level editor, where players themselves can make many different levels and share them around, which should add to the longevity of the game in the long run, at least in theory. I haven't tried making any yet, so I can't judge on how easy or hard it is to make anything in it. And before I finish the review, I'd like to mention that I didn't come across any bugs, besides some random frame rate drops out of nowhere, which didn't last long and were just minor inconveniences. Besides that, there were not many things that I'd say are bad about a game. Maybe the linearity towards the start of the game, but I guess that is just to show players how the mechanics work. And the sound that happens after clearing a main stage, they were quite annoying and sounded more like the Luftwaffe is attacking than a sound that you'd hear after successfully completing a stage. So, to wrap this all up, Youropa is quite a fun and creative puzzle platformer. The price tag might be a bit higher than the usual indie game price, but in my opinion, it is quite worth it. And we should always incentivize indie developers that make creative and out-of-the-box games like this. And before I forget, I started streaming. You can find the link to my Twitch down in the description. And of course, subscribe if you want to see more reviews like this. And leave a comment if you have any suggestions or comments about the review. And as always, goodbye and thanks for listening.